The whisper of aged leather and the low, contented hum of moneyed conversation was the nightly symphony of the Gilded Cage, the flagship restaurant of the Sterling Steaks empire. For Amelia Vance, it was the sound of a slow, elegant suffocation. Her life was a meticulous performance, measured in perfectly folded napkins, the precise angle of a wine glass, and the forced, bright smile that felt like a mask hardening on her face. At 23, she was a ghost in this opulent theater. Her own dreams of becoming a certified appraiser of fine antiques, a world of history, craftsmanship, and quiet truth, deferred and gathering dust like the forgotten heirlooms she longed to study. She was just another server, pouring expensive Bordeaux into crystal goblets, utterly oblivious that in a dimly lit alcove booth, a man whose name could destabilize markets was dissecting her every motion. He wasn't merely observing, he was auditing her soul. Julian Croft, the Phantom of Finance, was not here for the dry-aged ribeye. He was here to find the rot in the heart of the Sterling brand, and his cold, analytical judgment was about to collide with her life, not with a sudden explosion of fortune, but with a silent, devastating confrontation that would force her to choose between the safety of her servitude and the dangerous power of her own perception. This is not a story about a lucky break. It is the story of what happens when a lifetime of quiet observation finally finds its voice in a room where everyone else is lying. The Gilded Cage was designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings, mahogany walls dark as dried blood, and chandeliers that drip crystal light onto tables set with starched linen and heavy silver. For Amelia, it was a beautifully appointed prison. Her real life began after her shift, in the cramped two-bedroom apartment she shared with the lingering scent of her grandmother's lavender sachets. That apartment and the astronomical monthly bill from the Meadowlark Memory Care Facility was the reason she endured the nightly performance. Her grandmother, Clara, was the keeper of her childhood, the one who had first placed a dusty, tarnished locket in her small hands and taught her to see the story within the scratches, to feel the history in the heft of old silver. Clara had taught her to look closer, to find the maker's mark, to understand the difference between true patina and clever forgery. Now, Clara's own memories were tarnished, her mind a beautiful antique slowly succumbing to the decay of Alzheimer's. Meadowlark was the best facility they could afford, but best was a relative term. It was clean but sterile, the staff was overworked, and the cost was a relentless, crushing weight that Amelia bore alone. So she worked. She took every extra shift, memorized the esoteric wine list until the names of French vineyards haunted her sleep, and perfected the art of being present but invisible. The ache in her feet was a constant, a dull metronome counting down the hours until she could collapse. But beneath the polished veneer of the perfect waitress, the appraiser's eye never truly shut down. She noticed things. She saw the subtle fraying on the cuff of a man's supposedly bespoke suit. She recognized the cheap, tinny clasp on a woman's pearl necklace. She saw the desperation in the eyes of a young couple trying to impress a client, ordering the most expensive items while their hands trembled. She saw the loneliness in the wealthy widow at table 9, who came every Friday, ordering the same meal, speaking only to the staff. Amelia's mind was a quiet catalog of details, a repository of the small, authentic truths hidden beneath the restaurant's gilded facade. Tonight was a particularly tense Wednesday. A rumor had been circulating for weeks, a potential buyout, a hostile takeover. The corporate office was on edge, which meant the regional manager was on edge, which meant the restaurant manager, Mr. Davies, was a walking bundle of frayed nerves. Everything must be perfect, he'd hissed in the pre-shift meeting. We have VIPs in tonight, no mistakes, no excuses. One of the VIPs was in Amelia's section. He'd been there for an hour, alone in the most secluded booth, nursing a single glass of Macallan 25. He hadn't even looked at a menu. He was dressed in a simple charcoal gray wool sweater and dark trousers. No tie, no flashy watch. Yet he wore the clothes with an unnerving stillness, a sense of absolute self-possession that made the loudly dressed businessmen at other tables look like boys playing dress-up. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't reading. His gaze swept the room with an unnerving, quiet intensity. His eyes, a shade of deep, stormy blue, seemed to absorb everything. The interactions between staff, the expressions on the faces of the diners, the efficiency of the kitchen doors. Amelia guessed he was in his late 30s with a subtle tension around his jaw that spoke of immense, sustained pressure. He was an auditor, a critic, a spy. She wasn't sure which, but he made the hairs on her arms stand up. Around 8 o'clock, the delicate symphony of the restaurant was shattered. The front door swung open to admit Brent Sterling, the 29-year-old son of the company's founder. Brent was a walking personification of entitlement, draped in a suit that was offensively shiny, reeking of expensive cologne and cheap arrogance. He didn't wait to be seated, simply striding into the center of the dining room and clapping his hands together loudly. "Service! Let's go, people! I'm starving!" he announced to the room at large. Mr. Davies scurried over, his face a mask of forced servility. "Brent, Mr. Sterling, welcome. Your usual table is ready." "It better be," Brent sneered, scanning the room. His eyes landed on the quiet man in the corner booth. "Who's that?" "A Mr. Croft, sir. He has a reservation." Brent grunted, unimpressed, and swaggered to his table, which was unfortunately also in Amelia's section. He snapped his fingers at her as she approached, a gesture that made her stomach clench. "You girl, get me a bottle of the 82 Petrus, and don't take all night." "Right away, sir," Amelia said, her voice a carefully modulated, neutral tone. The 82 Petrus was over $5,000 a bottle. It was a ludicrously extravagant order meant purely for show. She retrieved the bottle from the cellar, presented it with the practiced grace of a sommelier, and poured a taste. Brent swirled it, sniffed it with an exaggerated air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. "It'll do," he said, dismissing her with a wave. The entire performance was a pathetic charade. Amelia knew from her own reading that a wine that old needed to breathe, that its subtle complexities were lost on a palate like Brent's, which was better suited to cheap beer. He was simply drinking the price tag. For the next hour, Brent was a terror. He sent his steak back twice, claiming the first was overcooked and the second was under season. He complained that the music was too loud and that it was too quiet. He was rude to the busboy and condescending to Amelia, calling her sweetheart and darling in a tone that dripped with slime. Amelia weathered it all with her professional calm, a quiet storm of resentment brewing beneath the surface. She was keenly aware of the man in the corner booth, Mr. Croft, watching the entire spectacle with an unnervingly blank expression. The true conflict erupted over something trivial. An elderly couple at the table next to Brent's, celebrating their 50th anniversary, had a small, discreet coughing fit. The husband was clearly frail, and his wife patted his back with gentle concern. Brent threw his napkin down on his plate. "For God's sake, are we in a hospital ward? I'm trying to eat here," he boomed, his voice carrying across the entire dining room. The couple froze, their faces flushing with humiliation. The wife murmured an apology. Amelia felt a white-hot flash of anger. These were good people, celebrating a lifetime together, being bullied by a spoiled child in a man's body. Her training, her need for this job, screamed at her to stay silent, to placate Brent. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, the voice that had taught her about integrity, about the quiet strength of standing up for what is right. She moved to the elderly couple's table. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly, ignoring Brent completely. "Can I get you some water, sir?" "We're fine, dear, thank you," the woman whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're so sorry for the disturbance." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Amelia said, her voice clear and firm. She turned to face Brent, her mask of professional deference finally cracking. "Sir, this is a public restaurant. Our other guests have every right to be here, just as you do." The silence in the dining room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the plush carpet. Brent Sterling stared at her, his jaw slack with disbelief. No one, especially not a waitress, spoke to him that way. Mr. Davies was already halfway across the room, his face pale with terror. Brent's shock quickly morphed into rage. He stood up, knocking his chair over with a crash. "Who the hell do you think you are? You're a servant. You exist to take my order and stay out of the way. You have the nerve to lecture me?" I have the nerve to ask you to treat other people with a basic level of human decency, Amelia replied, her heart hammering against her ribs but her voice miraculously steady. Decency? I own this place. I am this place, he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. You're fired. Get your things and get out. You're finished in this industry. Mr. Davies arrived, wringing his hands. Mr. Sterling, please. She's new. She doesn't understand. I don't care, Brent shouted, jabbing a finger in Amelia's face. His hand was shaking with fury. She's out. Now. Amelia stood her ground, her gaze locked with his. All the fear for her job, for her grandmother, for her future, was being consumed by a cold, righteous anger. As he ranted, gesturing wildly, her eyes were drawn to a detail. It was instinctual, the appraiser's habit of seeing the small things that reveal the whole truth. It was the watch on his wrist. He wore it like a trophy, a massive, complicated timepiece. He had mentioned it earlier to a sycophantic friend who had stopped by his table, a rare, limited edition Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon, a watch worth well over $1 million. But as his wrist trembled in the air inches from her face, Amelia saw something wrong. The guilloche pattern on the dial, the intricate machine-turned engraving, was too shallow. The edges of the numbers on the perpetual calendar were not quite as crisp as they should be. The blue of the moon phase indicator was a shade too bright, a chemical blue rather than the deep lapis lazuli of a genuine Patek. It was a fake, an incredibly, astronomically expensive and well-made counterfeit, a so-called super clone, but a fake nonetheless. A detail 99.9% of the world would miss, but it was a detail her grandmother had trained her to see. The difference between true craftsmanship and a hollow imitation. In that split second, the entire situation crystallized. Brent Sterling, the heir to an empire built on the promise of sterling quality, was a fraud. He was wearing a lie on his wrist, and he was trying to ruin her for speaking a simple truth. The fear vanished, replaced by an icy calm. She knew exactly what to do. She didn't scream, "Your watch is fake." That would be her word against his. A messy, unsubstantiated accusation. She had to be smarter. She had to use her observation like a scalpel. She lowered her voice, pitching it just loud enough for Brent, Mr. Davies, and, most importantly, the quiet man in the corner booth to hear. "You're right, Mr. Sterling," she said, her tone suddenly devoid of all anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like pity. "You are this place, and it's so important, isn't it, to maintain a certain standard, to ensure that everything is authentic." She let her gaze drop from his eyes to the watch on his wrist, holding it there for just a beat too long. A flicker of confusion, then panic, crossed Brent's face. He didn't understand how she could possibly know, but her deliberate, meaningful glance at the watch had unnerved him. "What are you talking about?" he blustered, instinctively pulling his hand back. Before Amelia could reply, a calm, deep voice cut through the tension. "It's a beautiful timepiece." All heads turned. Julian Croft was standing by his table, his napkin placed neatly beside his glass. He walked toward them with a silent, deliberate grace that commanded the room's attention far more than Brent's shouting had. He stopped beside Amelia, his presence a shield of unexpected solidarity. He looked at Brent, but his next words were addressed to Amelia. "You have a remarkable eye," he said, a statement, not a question. Then he turned his gaze to Brent, his stormy blue eyes now as cold and hard as chips of ice. An incredible piece, the 6002G. The engraving work is particularly difficult to replicate. Most forgeries get the depth wrong, the luster on the casing too. They use 306-hole steel, but the white gold Patek uses has a warmer, softer glow. It's a subtle difference, almost impossible to spot. He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Unless you know exactly what you're looking for." Brent Sterling's face had gone from red to a sickly, waxy white. He was staring at Julian Croft as if he'd seen a ghost. The nameplate on the table, Croft, suddenly clicked in his mind, connecting with the whispered rumors of a takeover. This wasn't just a VIP. This was the VIP, the man who held the future of his family's company in his hands. Julian Croft looked from the fraudulent watch to Brent's terrified face. Then he looked at Amelia, who stood tall and unflinching, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Brent's crumbling arrogance. Mr. Davies, Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute power. This young woman's employment is not to be terminated. In fact, I'd like to offer her my sincerest apologies for the behavior she's had to endure tonight. Please comp my bill and the anniversary couples as well. Send the check for both to Mr. Sterling. I'm sure he'll be happy to cover it. He then reached into his pocket, not for a wallet, but for a simple, elegant business card case. He took out a card and handed it to Amelia. It was thick, heavy stock, embossed with a single name, Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Holdings. My office, he said to her. Be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have something important to discuss. He gave a final dismissive look at the utterly broken Brent Sterling and walked out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the smoldering ruins of a spoiled heirs authority. Amelia looked down at the card in her trembling hand, the world tilting on its axis. She hadn't been saved by a miracle. She had been saved by a detail, by a lifetime of looking closer. Amelia didn't sleep. She sat in the worn armchair in her living room, the heavy linen business card resting on the side table like a talisman from another universe. The events of the evening replayed in her mind in a dizzying loop. Brent's crimson-faced rage, the suffocating silence of the dining room, the weight of every eye upon her, and then Julian Croft's voice, cutting through the chaos with the precision of a diamond blade. He hadn't just defended her. He had understood her. You have a remarkable eye. He had seen not a waitress, but an appraiser. A part of her was terrified. The name Croft Holdings was synonymous with corporate leviathans and ruthless efficiency. Julian Croft was known in the financial world as the alchemist for his ability to turn struggling companies into gold, often by stripping them down to their most profitable components and discarding the rest. He was not a philanthropist. He was a predator. What could a man like that possibly want with her? Yet beneath the fear was a thrum of exhilaration she hadn't felt in years. For one brief, terrifying moment, she had been entirely herself. She had spoken her truth, armed only with her perception, and it had been enough. The thought was both intoxicating and deeply unsettling. The next morning, she stood before her meager wardrobe in a state of quiet panic. Nothing she owned seemed appropriate for a meeting in the halls of power. She finally settled on a simple, dark gray dress she'd bought for a funeral years ago, a pair of scuffed but polished black flats, and her grandmother's old silver locket, its familiar weight against her chest a source of comfort. The Croft Holdings building was not a part of the city skyline. It was the skyline, a blade of black glass and steel that seemed to disappear into the clouds. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silence, staffed by security guards who looked like they could wrestle bears. When she gave her name at the front desk, the receptionist's practiced indifference instantly evaporated. Ms. Vance, of course. Mr. Croft is expecting you. Please take the private elevator to your right. The elevator moved with a silent, stomach-lurching speed, opening directly into a reception area on the penthouse floor. The space was an exercise in minimalist power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city spread out below like a map. A single, massive, abstract painting hung on one wall, its chaotic energy a stark contrast to the room's zen-like calm. A woman with a chic, asymmetrical haircut and an aura of formidable intelligence greeted her. Ms. Vance, I'm Eleanor Vance, Mr. Croft's executive assistant. Please come this way. Amelia was led not into a grand office, but into a smaller, more personal study. It was lined with shelves filled not with business trophies, but with books, histories, biographies, and several volumes on horology, the study of timepieces. Julian Croft was standing by the window, looking down at the city. He turned as she entered, dressed today in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that made him seem even more imposing than he had in the restaurant. Ms. Vance, Amelia, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to one of two leather armchairs. He didn't sit behind his desk, choosing the chair opposite hers, creating a sense of parity that she hadn't expected. Mr. Croft, she said, her voice a little breathless. First, he began, his stormy blue eyes focused intently on her. I want to clarify something. What I did last night was not an act of charity, and I am not a white knight. It was a business decision. Amelia felt a prickle of disappointment, though she wasn't sure why. A business decision? Yes. For the past 6 months, my firm has been conducting due diligence on Sterling Hospitality Group. The company projects an image of sterling quality, tradition, and excellence. My team of analysts has been poring over their financials, their supply chains, their customer satisfaction metrics. But numbers can lie. Culture is harder to quantify. He leaned forward slightly. I go into these places myself to find the truth that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. I go to see if the brand's promise is authentic. Last night I saw that it is not. He gestured around the room. This world, my world, is full of people like Brent Sterling. People who inherit power they haven't earned. People who wear their wealth like a costume. They are hollow, they are forgeries. And they are the single greatest liability to any organization. He paused, his gaze unwavering. And then there's you. You work in an environment that demands you be unseeing and unheard. Yet you see everything. You saw the humiliation of that elderly couple. You saw the lie on Brent Sterling's wrist. You didn't cause a scene. You didn't make a wild accusation. You used your observation with surgical precision. You exposed the fraud without saying a single word about it. That is not the skill of a waitress. That is the skill of an analyst, a strategist. Amelia was speechless, her heart pounding. He was articulating the very essence of who she was, a part of herself she thought no one else could ever see. So no, he continued, this is not a job offer out of pity. I am not starting a foundation, and I don't need a director of community outreach. I need you. I need your eye. He stood and walked over to a polished wooden box on a side table. He opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, were 2 pocket watches. One was ornate, gold and gleaming. The other was simpler, steel, and showed its age. Which one is more valuable? He asked. Amelia hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the table. This was familiar territory. This was home. She picked up the simpler steel watch first, feeling its weight in her palm. Her thumb gently wiped the crystal. She saw the faint, almost invisible signature on the enamel dial. She noted the elegant, slender hands. Then she looked at the gold one. It was heavy, but the details were clumsy. The engraving was shallow. The hinges felt weak. This one, she said, holding up the steel watch. The gold one is a late 19th century Swiss forgery, probably made to fool tourists. Decent materials, but poor craftsmanship. The steel one is an early Patek Philippe, one of their first series, from before they even became famous. It's a piece of history. It's priceless. A slow smile spread across Julian Croft's face. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it transformed his severe features, making him look younger. My grandfather's, he said, his voice softer, and a test, which you have, once again, passed with flying colors. He closed the box and turned back to her. I am proceeding with the acquisition of Sterling Hospitality, but I don't just want to own it. I want to fix it. I want to gut the inauthenticity and rebuild it on a foundation of genuine quality. To do that, I need to know where all the other forgeries are hidden, in the management, in the training protocols, in the customer experience. He returned to his chair. I'm offering you a position, Amelia, a 3-month probationary contract as a consultant for Croft Holdings, attached to my personal acquisitions team. Your title will be Brand Integrity Analyst. Your salary will be the annualized equivalent of $200,000. Your sole responsibility will be to move through the Sterling Group's assets, restaurants, hotels, supply chains, and observe. You will report your findings, the details that no one else sees, directly to me. At the end of 3 months, if your insights are as valuable as I believe they are, the position will be made permanent with a significant increase in salary and responsibility. Amelia's mind reeled. $200,000, brand integrity analyst. It sounded like something from a movie. It was an escape, a lifeline, a future she had never dared to imagine. It was the chance to finally use the skills her grandmother had given her. It meant she could move Clara to a better facility, a place with gardens and specialized care, a place where she would be safe and cherished. Why? She finally whispered. You have teams of Ivy League analysts. Why take a chance on a waitress? Julian Croft looked out the window for a long moment before answering. Because my entire empire was built on a single principle my grandfather taught me. You can't tell the value of an object just by looking at the price tag. You have to look closer. You have to understand its story, its craftsmanship, its soul. The Ivy League analysts can read a balance sheet. They can't read a room. They can't spot a fake Patek Philippe across a crowded restaurant. You can. Your perspective isn't a liability, Amelia. It's your greatest asset. The only question is, are you willing to bet on it? The offer hung in the air, shimmering with terrifying, beautiful possibility. It wasn't a handout. It was a challenge. A seat at a table she had never even known existed. And in the quiet of that powerful room, looking at the man who had seen the truth in her, Amelia Vance made her choice. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I am. The first month was a baptism by fire. Amelia was given a corporate credit card, a laptop thicker than any book she'd ever owned, and an office on the 75th floor that felt as vast and empty as a hangar. The transition from the familiar chaos of a restaurant floor to the hushed, sterile corridors of Croft Holdings was a profound culture shock. The language was different, a dizzying alphabet soup of KPIs, QBRs, and synergizing deliverables. The people were different, polished, ambitious, and deeply suspicious of the former waitress who had appeared out of nowhere and now had a direct line to Julian Croft himself. The undisputed queen of this new ecosystem was a woman named Cassandra Thorne, the head of the acquisitions team. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and viewed Amelia's appointment as a personal affront, a whimsical indulgence by a boss she otherwise revered. Cassandra didn't resort to overt sabotage. Her methods were far more insidious. She buried Amelia in mountains of irrelevant data, spreadsheets on napkin procurement, utility cost analyses for Midwestern hotels, while forgetting to CC her on email chains that contained the strategic marrow of the acquisition. Meetings were scheduled and rescheduled, with a breathless digital apology arriving in Amelia's inbox moments after they had concluded. "Just getting you up to speed on the fundamentals, Amelia," Cassandra would say, her smile as bright and cold as the recessed lighting in the corridors. "We wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed." The message, wrapped in the silken ribbon of corporate concern, was a blade. "You are an anomaly, a curiosity. You do not belong here. Go back to pouring wine." For the first 2 weeks, Amelia was not just drowning. She was adrift in a cold, silent ocean. The self-doubt, once a quiet whisper, became a vicious, roaring tide in her mind. Imposter, fraud, charity case. She would sit in her cavernous office, the city sprawling beneath her window like a silent, judgmental god, and stare at pivot tables until the numbers swam into meaningless hieroglyphs. The chair she sat in cost more than her rent. The pen on her desk could have paid for a month of her grandmother's medication. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe the rarefied, climate-controlled air. She was a forgery in a world of authentic power, and it was only a matter of time until someone with a practiced eye, someone like Julian Croft, noticed the shallow engraving on her soul and cast her aside. She nearly broke. One Thursday evening, after a particularly brutal meeting where Cassandra had politely but systematically dismantled a preliminary observation Amelia had made, she drove not to her own small apartment, but to Meadowlark. The smell of antiseptic and overcooked broccoli hit her the moment the door slid open. Clara was in the common room, staring at a television playing a game show at a deafening volume. But she wasn't watching it. Her gaze was fixed on the worn floral pattern of the armchair opposite her, her mind adrift in a sea of lost time. Amelia knelt beside her chair, taking her grandmother's dry, papery hand. "Grandma, it's me, Amelia." Clara's eyes, cloudy with confusion, slowly focused on her face. For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of a smile. "Oh, Amy, dear, you look so tired. Are they working you too hard at the little shop?" For her, Amelia was perpetually 19, working part-time at a local antique consignment store. "The shop is busy, Grandma," Amelia whispered, her throat tight. Clara's gaze drifted away again, towards the window overlooking a small concrete courtyard with a single sad-looking maple tree. "This place," she murmured, her voice thin as thread. "It has no stories. Everything is new. The chairs, the tables, they have no scratches, no dents. No one has loved them long enough to leave a mark. It's like being in a waiting room for the end of the world." The words were a perfectly aimed arrow, piercing through Amelia's fog of corporate anxiety and imposter syndrome. Her grandmother was right, and Cassandra, in her own cruel way, was also right. Amelia didn't belong in their world of spreadsheets and synergistic frameworks. She was trying to play their game by their rules, and she was failing spectacularly. Julian Croft hadn't hired a data analyst. He hadn't hired another Cassandra Thorne. He had hired an appraiser. He had hired Amelia Vance. A tectonic shift occurred within her. She wasn't an imposter trying to mimic the experts around her. She was a specialist with a unique, valid, and, if Croft was to be believed, valuable skill set. She had been so intimidated by the alien environment that she had forgotten to use her own tools. The next morning, Amelia walked into her office with the quiet, unshakable resolve of a craftsman entering her workshop. She pushed the teetering mountain of binders and spreadsheets to the far corner of her expansive desk. She closed the financial modeling software. On her clean, gleaming monitor, she opened the raw data dump of customer feedback cards from every Sterling Steaks location, a file Cassandra had sent over with the dismissive note, "Here's some light reading for you." Cassandra's team had already run a sentiment analysis, producing a glossy report that concluded customer satisfaction was, on average, a robust 8.710. But Amelia wasn't looking for averages. She was looking for maker's marks, for the subtle imperfections that tell the truest story. For 3 days, she did not attend a single meeting. She ordered her lunch in. She read. She immersed herself in the messy human scrawl of thousands of diners. She ignored the star ratings, the checkbox scores, and focused entirely on the handwritten comments, the little narratives offered up on a 3x5-inch card. She began to see a pattern, not a pattern of data, but a pattern of soul. In the high-performing, profitable restaurants, the comments were miniature tapestries of experience. Names were used. Maria remembered it was our anniversary and brought us a complimentary dessert. Our waiter, David, noticed my wife was cold and had the air conditioning adjusted without us even asking. "Thank you, Samuel, for making my daughter's birthday so special." These were not comments about service. They were comments about connection. They were evidence of employees who were not just present, but attentive. In the underperforming restaurants, the comments were ghosts. Food was good. Service was fine. But threaded through them, like hairline cracks in porcelain, were the details of neglect. Waited 15 minutes for a water refill. The handle on the men's room stall was broken. Our table was wobbly. The corner of our booth had a tear in the leather. To a data analyst, these were low-priority anecdotal outliers. To Amelia, they were everything. They were the shallow engraving on a fake watch, a broken handle, a wobbly table, an empty water glass. These were not isolated maintenance issues. They were the final visible symptoms of a deep cultural rot. They were signs that the staff felt no ownership, no pride. They were the result of managers who didn't care, who were themselves likely being squeezed by regional directors whose only metric for success was cost reduction. The brand's promise of sterling quality was a lie, not just on the wrist of its heir, but in the very bones of its operation. Amelia didn't build a spreadsheet. She crafted a story. She compiled her findings into a presentation, a narrative dossier titled The Patina of Neglect. She contrasted two restaurants, the thriving flagship in Chicago and the failing location in Cleveland. She used the customer's own words, blowing up images of the handwritten cards, letting their voices fill the sterile corporate space. She showed a picture of a gleaming, polished brass door handle from the Chicago location next to a blurry cell phone picture she'd paid a freelance photographer to take of the broken, dangling handle in Cleveland. She presented the wobbly table not as a maintenance request, but as the central metaphor for the entire failing enterprise. She requested a meeting with Julian Croft. His assistant, Eleanor, replied within minutes. "Mr. Croft's schedule is clear. He is in his study." Amelia deliberately did not invite Cassandra. She stood before him in the same quiet, book-lined room where he'd hired her, the city a silent witness through the vast window behind him. She presented her findings with the calm authority of an expert in her field. She didn't use jargon. She spoke of empathy, of dignity, of the profound economic impact of a culture of inattention. She argued that the soul of a service business wasn't found in its balance sheet, but in the small, cumulative details of its customer experience. When she finished, the silence in the room was profound. Julian had not moved, his hands steepled before him, his stormy eyes fixed on her. The silence stretched, and for a terrifying moment, Amelia thought she had failed, that she had fundamentally misunderstood her mandate. "The wobbly table," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "My acquisitions team, headed by Cassandra, presented me with a 50-page report on the failing Cleveland restaurant. It was full of 5-year revenue projections, local demographic analysis, supply chain logistics, and competitor pricing strategy. They blamed the decline on a new steakhouse opening 3 blocks away and a depressed regional economy." He leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto hers, and she saw not disappointment, but a brilliant, searing intensity. Not one of those 6-figure analysts mentioned the wobbly tables. Not once. They looked at the forest and diagnosed it with abstract market conditions. You looked at a single diseased leaf and understood the health of the entire ecosystem. He shook his head, a slow, almost imperceptible motion of awe. "This is not just brilliant, Amelia. This is the entire thesis of my investment philosophy made manifest." He picked up the phone on his desk. "Eleanor, cancel my 3 o'clock and get Cassandra Thorne in my study, now." Cassandra entered 5 minutes later, her poise perfect, her expression a carefully curated mask of neutral curiosity. The mask faltered when she saw Amelia standing not like a student before the headmaster, but like an equal. "Amelia has just identified with forensic precision the core issue plaguing half of our new assets," Julian said, his voice flat and cold, devoid of preamble. "An issue your entire team of highly compensated analysts missed. She did this by ignoring the mountains of irrelevant data you provided and doing the job I actually hired her for." He let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. Effective immediately, Amelia Vance is no longer a consultant. She is the Director of Brand Integrity for the Sterling acquisition. All department reports related to customer and employee experience, operational standards, and in-store design will go through her. She is to be granted full autonomy to implement the changes she deems necessary. Her recommendations will be treated as my direct orders. Are we clear? The color drained from Cassandra's face, leaving behind a waxy, brittle shell. In the brutal, meritocratic ecosystem of Croft Holdings, this was not just a dressing down, it was a public execution. She looked at Amelia, and for the first time, her expression was not one of condescension or pity, but a volatile cocktail of shock, resentment, and a grudging, infuriated awe. "Yes, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice a tight, clipped whisper. "Perfectly clear." The victory was terrifying, absolute, and profoundly lonely. That evening, as Cassandra and her team filed silently out of the office, their averted gazes were like small, sharp stones. Amelia hadn't just survived. She had triumphed, not by conforming, but by being resolutely, uniquely herself. The path forward was treacherous, and she knew she had made a powerful, patient enemy. But as she stood alone in the quiet study, the city lights beginning to glitter below, she felt the foundation of her own worth solidify beneath her feet. She wasn't an imposter anymore. She was the director. 2 years passed, not in a blur, but as a series of deliberate, hard-won battles and quiet, transformative victories. The title on Amelia's office door now read, Vice President, Experience and Quality. The Sterling Hospitality Group had been remade in the image of her philosophy. The detail is the difference. The wobbly tables were the first to go, followed by a company-wide audit of every physical detail, from the weight of the silverware to the scent in the restrooms. But the real changes were human. Amelia championed a program that gave every restaurant manager a dignity budget, a discretionary fund to fix small problems and create moments of delight for customers without corporate approval. She instituted story sessions in staff training, where employees shared moments of exceptional service not as metrics, but as examples of their craft. She fought for and won a comprehensive benefits package and a crisis fund for hourly employees, arguing to a skeptical board that a company's soul is only as healthy as its most vulnerable worker. Profits soared, but more importantly to Amelia, staff turnover plummeted. The hollow, fraudulent culture had been replaced, piece by piece, with one of genuine care. Her relationship with Julian Croft had deepened into a rare and powerful alloy of mentorship, partnership, and a quiet, unspoken friendship. They would often work late, long after the offices had emptied, dissecting a problem over takeout containers of noodles eaten at his massive mahogany desk. It was in these moments that she saw the man behind the myth. She learned his grandfather had been a watchmaker, a refugee who arrived with nothing but his tools and an obsession with precision, and who had been ruined by a business partner who sold cheap, shoddy imitations under his name. Julian's obsession with authenticity wasn't a business strategy. It was a deeply personal, generational crusade against the fraudulent. He used to tell me, Julian had said one night, looking out at the city, that any fool can make something that looks valuable. The genius is in making something that feels valuable. That integrity, it's in the weight, the balance, the things you can't see but you can feel. You, Amelia, you can feel it. In that moment, she understood that he hadn't just hired an employee. He had found a philosophical heir. Her life outside the glass tower had been reborn. Clara now lived at the Amberwood residence, a place so beautiful it hurt Amelia's heart with gratitude. It was built around a restored 19th century manor, with acres of manicured gardens and walking paths. Clara had her own suite, filled with her favorite books and a small workbench, where, on lucid days, an art therapist helped her polish old pieces of silver. The disease was a relentless tide, pulling more of her away each day, but her terror was gone. Here, surrounded by objects with history, with patina, with love, she was at peace. Amelia had not cured her, but she had given her a beautiful final chapter. One rainy Wednesday evening, driving home from a late flight, Amelia found herself on a familiar street. On an impulse born of nostalgia and a need to touch the beginning, she pulled her sleek, dark blue sedan to the curb. She got out and walked towards the warm, golden glow of the gilded cage. It was the same, yet entirely different. The opulent decor remained, but the oppressive, intimidating silence was gone, replaced by the warm, contented hum of people truly enjoying themselves. The manager, a woman Amelia had personally promoted from a server position in another city, greeted her with a warm, genuine smile. Amelia took a small table in the corner, the very booth where Julian Croft had sat and changed her life. She watched the staff. They moved with a fluid, confident grace. They anticipated needs. They smiled not because a training manual told them to, but because they seemed to take a quiet pride in their work. She saw the manager discreetly adjust the tie of a young busboy, giving him a quiet word of encouragement. She saw details, thousands of them, all aligned to create an authentic whole. Her server was a young woman, perhaps 20, her name tag reading Chloe. She was professional, efficient, but Amelia's practiced eye saw more. She saw the subtle tension in the young woman's jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hand as she poured water, the faint shadow of exhaustion under her eyes. She saw the soles of her shoes, professionally polished but worn thin at the heel. She saw the quiet, focused way Chloe scanned her tables, an innate observational skill that was not yet conscious of its own power. Amelia saw herself, a ghost from a not-so-distant past. When the bill for her small salad and iced tea came, Amelia placed her corporate card on the tray. When Chloe returned, Amelia signed the slip. She wrote in a tip, not an ostentatious, life-altering sum that might frighten or confuse, but a generous one, $500. Enough to fix a car, to pay a pressing bill, to offer a moment of profound relief. But the money was the least of the gift. On the back of the customer copy of the receipt, she took the heavy, expensive pen from her purse and wrote a short note. Chloe, I see the way you watch your tables. You notice the small things, the empty water glass, the shifting posture of a guest. That is not just service. It is a rare and valuable form of perception. Never doubt it. It is not your job. It is your gift. The details are your power. Keep looking closer. She slid the receipt back into the folder, placed it at the edge of the table, and left, walking out into the rain-slicked night without a backward glance. She didn't need to see the young woman's reaction. The gesture wasn't for her own gratification. It was the planting of a seed, a quiet act of passing on the legacy. As Amelia drove away, the city lights fracturing into a kaleidoscope of color through the rain on her windshield, she felt a profound and settled peace. Julian Croft had not been her savior. He had been a catalyst, the force that applied pressure to the carbon of her life. But the diamond that emerged was of her own making, forged by her grandmother's lessons and her own courage. Her life had been transformed not by a billionaire's whim, but by the quiet, revolutionary power of her own discerning eye. And she had come to understand the most elegant truth of all, that the greatest value is not in appraising the world, but in seeing its hidden worth and having the power to polish it, to restore it, and to finally truly let it shine.